and make the viewer count go up a little bit artificially.
Oh, good.
Baz has skills, you see.
Is that right?
Everybody is gifted in some way.
And there we go. This is Baz's contribution. Baz's contribution. Watch out, everyone.
Now
So
you
we're
guys
gonna
can't say I never did nothing for you.
Whoa.
We're going to go to number 1, see?
What's this? The all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye.
What chapter did you say? We're reading in Exodus. We're reading in Exodus chapter 15.
Yeah, so it's gonna be Exodus 13. Actually, I'll do a share screen here so you guys can see. I think it's video. Does that work? Oh, let me turn on my. There you go. So it's on my screen share. Exodus 13, 17 through
Hey, Austin?
26. Yeah.
Do you get money if I watch this ad on Twitch?
Probably not. I don't think so.
Okay, well I'm gonna turn my ad blocker back on then.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. Actually, I have it set so that there shouldn't be any commercials. I think it's just Twitch wanting money. Okay.
Oh,
Let's.
Piff.
Oh. Naz, you go
Didn't see
ahead.
Piff. Go ahead with what?
I don't. You.
Recap?
You're talking to Piff.
Oh, no.
Or you're just saying hi to Piff.
Piff, yeah, just Piff is being quiet. So there we go.
All
I
right.
interrupted. Sorry.
Well, I'm gonna be drinking a Red Bull
Just
through
being
this
quiet.
because
a Red Bull.
yeah, because Dean and I and Yellow
Yeah.
were quite busy last night, so I'm.
Dude, I
Audio is
falling
really
asleep.
cutting out.
Is it?
Is it?
That's
Hey,
like
everybody.
really bad.
Hello.
Try exiting and then rejoining.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. So if you can mute yourselves, unless you have a question you want to chime in. That way it's not going crazy. So here we go. We're gonna start this thing. Kick it off right. Welcome to our weekly live Bible study. It's called Portions. We do these every Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, from Discord. And also, if you're on Twitch, you can just type Discord in chat. Hold on. But yeah, in Twitch, you can just type Discord in the chat, and you'll get a link to join the voice conversation. You can also just type in the Twitch chat, and it also forwards to our Discord so we can see everything that you guys are saying in Twitch. We will read a portion of scripture, we'll have some commentary and then discussion around it, and then we'll move on to the next portion. These usually last about 2 hours, and they are recorded, so if you miss anything, you can go back and rewatch it, assuming that we actually broadcast it. That being said, once again, Naz, can you do a recap of last week's portion?
Well, because of Passover, we've gone outside of the normal standard reading. So we were in Leviticus, but now we're going to Exodus. So I think a recap probably wouldn't be the best thing, but maybe an introduction to where we are. So we're going to be reading from Exodus chapter 13, 14, and 15. And so what that is basically the narrative leading up to the Red Sea crossing or the Reed Sea crossing, however you define that. And so this is the kind of the redemptive event that you see in Exodus, where the Most High delivers his people. And hopefully we're going to see how this event was reimagined. And so we're going to look at like texting like Isaiah, for instance, and Psalms. And we're going to see how they employ Leviathan and Rahab imagery, Tanim imagery to the actual crossing of the Red or Reed Sea. And it will kind of illuminate the text and give us a much more broader reading and understanding of how this narrative was understood. Anyway, that's just a brief introduction.
All right, sweet. All right, let me get into this thing. All right, so now we're going to go into the Torah portions. And we are starting off in Exodus 13, verse 17. Naz, is there a certain stopping point that you have for any of this? I was going to do like
No.
probably just 13, and then I've got like 2 breaks in 14. Okay, cool. Now, when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near, for God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Therefore God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in a battle formation from the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will certainly take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. And then they set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from the presence of the people. All right, that was chapter 13 in that section. And I have a few little notes here. One of the things is that this journey probably would have been about a 10-day journey if taken more on a direct path, but instead God leads them in a roundabout way that would take a much longer time. The Targum Jonathan's note that God did not want them to see the bones of 200,000 people who had left Egypt at a previous time and died near the sea road. And there's also an inscription of Pharaoh Seti I, showing that the sea road was also covered with different military outposts. So the section in which he's talking about, um, what is it? He did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near. The people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. That could allude to either of those instances, either seeing the bones of 100,000 people that have fallen from battle, or from seeing all these military outposts, which they were not prepared to defend themselves. And
Okay.
that's all I got.
So here we see this of this light and darkness. And so when you read, like in Joshua, for instance, when Joshua's retelling what happened at the crossing of the Red Sea, there's this emphasis on this darkness that was between the Egyptians and between the Israelites. And Exodus also has the imagery of this light and darkness that happens. And so this is really a first clue, because what we're going to see is there's a subcontext of creation actually in the account of the crossing of the Red Sea. So here you got the idea of darkness and light, as you would do in the first day of creation, where in the first day of creation you've got this kind of separation between the darkness and the light. And so this is being reflected in the account here in chapter 13. But we're also going to see, as in chapter 14, also pointers to day 2 and day 3 of creation. And so this is kind of the build up to a new creation event or a recreation event, if that makes sense. So that's what I've got so far.
All right. Any other questions, comments, any observations in here?
Yeah, I do have an observation. Well,
You cut out there. I don't know if you're still if you're still talking or not, but the mic just dropped.
um, well, Rashi actually has commentary rather than myself, but if and when they're talking about how the Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and pillar of fire by night. Some interesting linguistic aspects of this that we can see within the original Hebrew. If we look at the interlinear, um, to lead the way, lan hotam haderek. The lamed here is actually punctuated with what's called a patach. Um, so we also see something similar to that in Deuteronomy 133, and where the lamed in a similar word is punctuated with a patach as well. Um, thus, it leads this verb to mean to make them guided by means of an agent. Um, the agent being the pillar of cloud, and the Holy One uh, in His glory Himself led it before them. So He didn't act as their immediate guide, but He provided the pillar of cloud that they might be guided by means of it. So, as a matter of fact, as the scriptural account shows, it was by means of the pillar of cloud that they set forth on their journeys. And the pillar of cloud was not for giving light to them, but to show them the way. Rather, I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit from Rashi's commentary on this particular section of Exodus.
Yeah. Good stuff. Any other comments, questions, anything else? And if anyone is having issues in Discord, Flawless, you mentioned that. You can go to the Twitch stream and see if that's better. If not, let me know. Okay. Chapter 14. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp in front of Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon opposite it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the sons of Israel, They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all of his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am Lord." And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart towards the people, and they said, "What is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he had horses harnessed to his chariot and took his people with him, and he took 600 select chariots and all other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. So the Lord hardened the hearts of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all their horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army, and they overtook them by camping by the sea beside Piharoth in front of Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were coming after them, and they became so very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. And then they said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, so that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than for us to die in the wilderness." Um, I'll just keep going through the next part here. But Moses said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will perform for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again ever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and reach out with your hand over the sea and divide it, and the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. And as for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all of his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots, and through his horsemen." All right, I'm going to pause it there and pull up some notes here. So there's an order to camp at and I'm gonna butcher the name, but Pi or P Harathoth, Harathoth, whatever. But it's generally interpreted as mouth of the diggings, which would be in reference to potentially reference to canal work that was being constructed during that period that went north to south, right in that area. Which I thought was kind of cool, is that they're basically this area that the Egyptians are building is where they are camping. And then also where it says they left boldly. The wording there is with an upraised hand, which was an idiom reflecting defiance, which is all still used today, like a clenched fist in the air. Yeah, and then on the Midrash, it says that the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, and according to that, it would be that the sea was not divided until they were actually already in the water, up to their nostrils. And that's it. Those are just like little tidbit things that I pulled out. Any other comments, questions, oddities? Okay.
Okay, so when it comes to the life of Moses, he prefigures the life of the nation, and so there's going to be an analogy between the nation coming through the water and the early part of the life of Moses. So if you think about the early life of Moses, that he was delivered from the water, and later on the nation of Israel is going to be delivered from the water. Moses escapes into the wilderness after the death of an Egyptian man. The nation of Israel are going to escape Egypt after the death of the firstborn Egyptians. Moses stays in the wilderness for 40 years. The nation of Israel are going to stay in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses meets the Most High at a burning bush. The nation of Israel meets the Most High at a burning mountain. An angel or the Most High seeks to kill Moses, but then you've got this curious instance where Zipporah takes the blood from the circumcised son and touches his feet. And the Hebrew word for touch there is employed in the Passover account when they touched the doorposts with the blood of the Passover lamb or goat. And so you got these connections between the early part of the life of Moses, and he prefigures that of the nation. And so if you think about, for instance, how early on in Exodus, the Egyptians cast the Hebrew male children into the sea. Well, what you're going to see now in this account is kind of a reversal, where the army of Pharaoh is now going to be killed by the sea. So again, there's these links all the way back to the very beginning of Exodus. And this is also going to be couched in terms of also Leviathan and Rahab imagery. So, who is Egypt? How is Egypt described in the scriptures? Well, if you go to places like Isaiah chapter 30, verse 7, it says this: "For Egypt helps in vain and to no purpose. Therefore I have called her Rahab, who sits still." So here in Isaiah, it calls Egypt Rahab. Rahab is a tanim. That's like a sea monster. You first see these types of monsters in Genesis chapter 1. And later on, in places like Ezekiel, Pharaoh is called a tanim. And you can see this in Ezekiel chapter 29. This is chapter 29, verses 2 and 3. "Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against Egypt, all of it. Speak and say, so says the Master Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, great monster who lies in the midst of his rivers, who has said, my river is mine, and I, even I, have made it." So there you got Ezekiel, and he's ascribing this Tanim imagery to Pharaoh. And so now when you're thinking about Egypt, think in terms of a tanim, a sea monster, uh, as, as as Ezekiel is saying. And so when you look at other places where Rahab is employed, for instance, in Psalms 89, you get this. So this is Psalms 89, verses 9 and 10. You rule the pride of the sea. When its waves rise up, you calm them. You have broken Rahab in pieces like one the slain. You have scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. And this is in Isaiah chapter 51. And again, it's going to still talk about Rahab. Awake, awake, put on strength, arm of Yod-Heh-Vav. Awake as in the days of old, the generations of ancient times. Isn't it you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the monster? Isn't it you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? So there in Isaiah, it's linking this Rahab imagery to the crossing of the Red Sea. And so it's looking at that imagery, and basically it's going to be associating the coming army with this figure known as Rahab. And when you look at the Targumic material, it picks up on these allusions internally. So this is the Targum of Isaiah. So this is how the Targum of Isaiah interprets Isaiah 51, 9 to 10. Reveal yourself, put on the strength of might from the Lord. Reveal yourself as in the days of old, in the generations which were at the beginning. Was it not for your sake, congregation of Israel, that I broke the mighty, that I destroyed Pharaoh and his host, who was strong as a dragon? Was it not for your sake, O congregation of Israel, that I dried up the sea, the water of the great deep? I made the depth of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over. So there, the Targum is interpreting Rahab in terms of this Tanim imagery. But we've already got this directly connected in places like Isaiah and other places. And Ezekiel gives us this kind of associated imagery when it's talking about Pharaoh and Egypt. And this is from Psalms 89, 9 and 10. So, and then I'm going to give the Targumic rendering. You rule the pride of the sea. When its waves rise up, you calm them. You have broken Rahab in pieces like one of the slain. You have scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. So this is how the Targum renders this. You rule over the pride of the sea. When its waves increase and become high, you will subdue them. You have crushed Rahab, that is evil Pharaoh, like one killed by the sword. With the strength of your strong arm, you have scattered your enemies. So again, there in the Targum of Psalms, it's applying this Rahab Tanim imagery to the crossing of the Red Sea. And there's going to be other elements that we're going to unpack as we go through, and we're going to see how now creation factors in when this Tanim imagery pops up. But that's what I've got to say for the moment.
Cool. I like it. Any other comments, questions, objections? Potato Tease. I think, was Potato in this one last time? It seems like a familiar name. But Potato's on Twitch as well. All right. Okay, moving on. Then the angel of God who had been going before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Therefore the one did not approach the other all night. Then Moses reached out with his hand over the sea. The Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. But at the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty, so that the Egyptians each said, "Let me flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Reach out with your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses reached out with his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak. While the Egyptians were fleeing right into it, the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them, not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right and their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. Okay. More commentary here. So one of the interesting things is Josephus talks about this, and also kind of repeated in Psalm 77, 16 through 18, which is that this is a very brief account where it says the waters came down. But in Psalm 77, 16, it says, the waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and wreathed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The heavens resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. The thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world, and the earth trembled and quaked. And Josephus is tying this in to also be talking about the same situation that we have in Exodus, where the waters are coming down with storms of wind. You have got showers of rain coming down and dreaded thunder, lightning flashes. There's flashes of fire. There's thunderbolts that are darting on the Egyptians and like striking them individually, with darkness of night covering everything so that not a single Egyptian could possibly escape from this. So whereas Exodus has this imagery of just a Passover of water, essentially just water colliding over them, and that's killing them. It seems as though Psalms and also the tradition that has been passed on has been a much more dreaded scene involving lightning and fire and just complete chaos and something extremely terrifying. And then there's another note in the Talmud separate from that, which is saying that God says, the work of my hands is drowning in the sea. And this goes into the next chapter. But you all desire to sing songs, which I think is talking a lot about God's compassion and how he does not delight in destruction of evil, which is mentioned numerous times. Like these are the works, even the Egyptians are the work of his hands, and yet at their destruction we still sing songs over destroying God's work. So that's my little commentary on randomness.
So we've met Rahab. So Rahab is Egypt in the scriptures, and we've seen how Rahab is a Tanim. But we're also going to meet Leviathan. And so I'm going to read out Psalms 74:13. So notice the language about dividing the sea or breaking the sea, and then notice that it talks about monsters in the plural. You broke the sea by your strength. You burst the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. You cracked open the heads of Leviathan. You gave him to be food for the people of the wilderness. So here you've got this sea monsters, but it's plural. You've got multiple heads as well. It's in the plural. And so here it's indicating not one monster, but multiple monsters, at least two. And there's this other monster, it's called Leviathan. And again, just like with Rahab, Leviathan imagery is associated with the crossing of the Red Sea. So this is from the Targum of Psalms, and again, it's going to link up the imagery. So Psalm 74:14 in the Targum. You have shattered the heads of Pharaoh's soldiers. You have handed them over for destruction to the people of the house of Israel, and their dead bodies to jackals. So there, it's associating Leviathan imagery to Pharaoh's soldiers. And again, you've got another example of this in the Targum of Isaiah. So this is Isaiah chapter 27:1. This isn't the Targum. This is just a standard translation. In that day, Yod-Heh-Vav, with his hard and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, and Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon that is in the sea. And this is how the Targum interprets it. At that time, the Lord shall punish with his great, mighty, and strong sword the king who has magnified himself as Pharaoh the first. So there, it's interpreting Leviathan imagery again, and it's associating with Pharaoh. So you got now two sea monsters, which is being envisioned as being defeated at the crossing of the Red Sea. And when it comes to creation imagery, when you look at Leviathan and Rahab, sometimes there's creation imagery associated with them. So I'm going to read Psalm 74 again, but notice that it breaks out into this kind of creation type language. You broke the sea by your strength. You burst the heads of sea monsters in the waters. You cracked open the heads of Leviathan. You gave him to be food for the people of the wilderness. You divided the fountain and the torrent. You dried up mighty rivers. The day is yours, the night is also yours. You have established the light and the sun. You have fixed the boundaries of the earth. You have formed the summer and winter. So there it breaks into this kind of creation type language. But this isn't the only place this happens. This also happens in Psalms chapter 89 as well. So here you can see this kind of creation language here. You rule the pride of the sea. When its waves rise high, you still them. You have broken Rahab in pieces as one slain. You have scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. The heavens are yours, and the earth is yours. The world and its fullness, you have founded them. You created the north and the south. So there again, it's associating a defeat of one of these Tanim, and then you get this kind of creation language associated with it. Well, when you're reading the account of the crossing of the Red Sea, Josephus gives us an interesting detail. He says that they reached the sea at the third day. And this is like a little hint, so to speak, to the third day of creation. Because you've got this kind of light and dark motif between the Egyptians and the Israelites already on the surface. And this reflects day one of creation, where the light and the darkness was separated out. And then you've got the waters retracting and separating one from another in the account of the crossing of the Red Sea. And this mimics day two of creation, where the waters are separated from the waters. And then you've got the revealing of the dry ground. And so in the account that you see in Exodus, it uses the same Hebrew that you see in Genesis chapter 1, when in day 3 the dry ground appears. And so basically when they're coming through now the sea, it's a replay of Genesis chapter 1. So at the point of redemption, at the point of their salvation, you get creation language. And so creation and redemption are being fused together. And if you understand now that when that Pharaoh and his armies are considered to be these Tanim, these sea monsters, and they're coming to destroy his people, and then the Most High delivers them, he steps in and he slays the dragons. Now you've got all of the imagery together. And so when you're reading the Psalms, and the Psalms are talking about the defeat of Rahab and Leviathan, and it suddenly breaks into this creation language, well, you've got all of the component parts there in the Exodus account. You got the first 3 days of creation, bringing to mind the creation week. You've got Pharaoh and the army now in the role of Leviathan and Rahab coming to destroy them, and then you've got the Most High stepping in and smiting Rahab and Leviathan. And you're also going to see this in chapter 15. The way that the language is employed, it's as if the army is saying, we want to devour the Israelites, but we'll see that in chapter 15. But that's my comments for the moment.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, observations, insults?
I'll save my insults for the end.
Okay. There was the last bit here, which I thought was interesting. It says, when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. And I don't know if I have the actual source here. This might have just been something that I was reading and just glanced at. But the fact that they basically needed to see the power of God before they believed in God. And I want to say that was Talmudic, but yeah, just they saw the power, they feared him, and then they believed him after these things. But it seems like prior to that, and even in most of this, it seems like they're doubting God being able to save them, doubting Moses the entire time. They just don't have faith, which I think is reflective of most of this whole story being retold numerous times throughout the Bible. Different characters, same people. They just don't have faith. They don't have the trust, and then you see God's power being displayed, some miracle happening, deliverance, and then everyone returning.
You see the same thing happen in the New Testament with Thomas. He doubted, and God appeared. He doubted that he had risen from the dead, and then God appeared before him, and then he believed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeshua said that blessed are those who believe and have not seen me.
Yep. Yeah, I imagine it would be so much more powerful to be there in that moment, and just having a complete faith in God, knowing that, like, after you go through something like this or through one of the other, dozen stories that are very similar to it throughout the Bible. All right. Any other comments, questions, observations? Moving into chapter 15. Okay. Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has thrown into the sea, and the choicest of his officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The waters covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, is majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, destroys the enemy. And in the greatness of your excellence, you overthrow those who rise up against you. You send out your burning anger, and it consumes them like a chaff. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters were piled up. The flowing waters stood up like a heap. The depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. And the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoils, shall be satisfied against them. I will draw my sword, my hand will destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you among the gods, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? You reached out with your right hand, and the earth swallowed them. In your faithfulness you have led the people whom you have redeemed. In your strength you have guided them to your holy habitation. The people have heard, they tremble. Anguish has gripped the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were terrified. The leaders of Moab trembled. Trembling grips them. All the inhabitants of Canaan have despaired. Terror and dread fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm they are motionless as stone, until your people pass over, Lord, until the people pass over whom you have purchased. You will bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, Lord, which you have made as your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, which your hands have established. Your Lord, the Lord shall reign forever and ever. Okay, opening up for questions, comments, insults, and we also see a lot of that same thing that Naz was talking about, the sea swallowing.
Yeah, I wanted to know what version of the Bible you're reading out of.
I think this is just NASB.
Okay.
I just
I
did
was
a
just curious.
copy. Yeah, I just did a copy paste from online to a single document with notes. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was NASB.
Actually, I have some commentary on this one as well that I'd prepared in advance. So, um, after the deeps covered them and they went down into the depths like a stone. So they're saying, "Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe." Um, so we see in the Midrash in Shemot Rabbah 1:5, and these are the names of the children of Israel, B'nai Yisrael. For the purpose of understanding the process of redemption, they're mentioned here. Reuven corresponds to this, saying, "For I have surely seen the depredation of my nation." Shimon corresponds, and the Lord heard their pleas. Um, Levi or Levi, however you want to pronounce it, corresponds to the part of the storyline wherein Hashem empathized with their suffering, as it says, from within the bush. To fulfill the verse, I am with him in his pain. So Judah corresponds to their thanks that they give to Hashem, and Issachar corresponds to the wages that Hashem provided for their time in slavery in the form of the plunder of Egypt and the sea, which we're talking about here, to fulfill the verse. And after all, they shall leave with great wealth. And there's a lot more correspondence, but I thought it would be cool to just throw that in there.
I like that one. All right. Any other comments, questions? Moving into verse 19.
Yeah, so you got the Tahom there. Well, actually, it's in the plural, but in Isaiah it's in the singular. And so you got the Tahom associated with the crossing of the Red Sea or Reed Sea. And so again, you've got this kind of creation language just below the surface. And so you meet the Tahom in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, and then you meet the Tanim later on in Genesis chapter 1. So again, you've got this kind of creation language that's there. But you also meet the Tahom in the flood account of Noah. And you also get the idea of the waters departing and the dry ground appearing in the account of Noah. And it actually employs the same Hebrew in the story of the crossing of the Red Sea with the story of Noah. And so basically you can connect three events together. You can connect the crossing of the Red Sea, the flood of Noah, and Genesis chapter 1 based on the similar Hebrew that's being employed. And so again, it's linking it all the way back into Genesis. But this could also present Moses as a new Noah. What links Noah and Moses together is the Hebrew word employed for ark that you see in the sense of Noah's ark is employed in Exodus as well. When it comes to where Moses was placed, he was placed into an ark. Where the Hebrew word there is the same Hebrew word that you see employed in the story of Noah. And so the Torah there seems to be linking Moses to Noah. And if you think about kind of general kind of concepts, Noah was to bring rest from the toil that they had, or that was an expectation that was given to him. And Moses was going to bring rest from the toil of the work that Israel was experiencing. So you've got these kind of conceptual parallels. Also, 120 years is associated with the story of Noah. And also, at the very end of his life, Moses lives to 120 years old. So again, this may be another indicator to the storyline of Noah. And so you got again this kind of judgment with water that happens, and that you see with the story of Noah. So you got these parallels which could link all three accounts together. And so again, it goes back to the idea of new creation. When the Most High brings redemption to his people, he fuses new creation and redemption together. And so this kind of tight nexus of understanding is going to impact your reading of the Gospels and the epistles, because you get places like in the epistles where salvation and new creation are fused together. Why are they doing that? Why are they connecting these two things together? Well, it's right here in the Torah. Anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments, questions, observations? Anything you like, or if you just want to say hi.
I noticed that the audio is a little bit worse the more people that join.
That could just be a connection issue.
Another thing also, when it comes to Exodus chapter 15, verse 9, sorry, there we go. It says this: the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my soul shall be filled with them. I will draw my sword, my hand will destroy them. So here you got this kind of language: my soul shall be filled with them, my nefesh will be filled with them. And so if you think about this in terms of Tanim imagery, sea monster imagery, they're like acting like a monster who's coming to devour the people. And you can see this type of devouring language elsewhere in the Tanakh with the prophets. For instance, in Jeremiah, when it talks about Babylon and Assyria, it uses Tanim imagery in association with Babylon and Assyria. And they're pictured as consuming the people, like a monster consuming the people. And so the same type of imagery seems to be being applied here in Exodus as well. So, it just illuminates the type of narrative and how these things were understood. It's not just simply a dry narrative now. It's fused with this imagery of slaying this Tanim, and the associated creation imagery now would just be below the surface. Anyways, it's a much more richer reading of the text, but those are my comments.
I like that. There's I noticed that there was quite a few references to just devouring in general throughout scriptures, as well as it being placed along with side by side with wall imagery. Like there's walls, and then there's a devouring that happens in relation to the walls. I'll see if I can pull up some of those verses and stuff, and I'll put them in the Parsha discussion. But it's an interesting similarity there.
Yeah, there's actually some text in the Targum that actually talks about how the waters were congealed like a wall, 300 miles on their right hand and or on their right and on their left. So I can kind of see where you're coming from on that. So whenever you get that, just post it and tag me.
You got it. Yeah, and then we also have Revelation. I don't know if Naz, if you touched on that one today, or if I'm just recalling earlier, but Revelation's talking about dragons, devouring the child and that kind of thing. Just that same imagery of devouring things and being brought out of the water, that applies in Revelation as well as in all of these.
Yeah, at key points in Revelation chapter 12, there's crossover with the narrative of coming out of Egypt. So when it comes to the Nile, if you think about the imagery with the Nile for a moment, what was one of the first plagues that Moses brought? Well, it was to make the waters go blood red. And so you've got this kind of blood red imagery now being associated with Nile imagery. Anciently, although the Nile had multiple heads, there was 7 famous heads that it had. People like Pliny the Elder, when they're talking about the Nile, he talks about how the Nile has got 7 famous heads. And so this could be basically dragon type imagery that we're seeing when it comes to the Nile. In Revelation chapter 12, you've got this image of this 7-headed dragon. And it's red, so a red 7-headed dragon. Well, this could be describing the Nile. And so when it comes to the child whom the woman gives birth in Revelation chapter 12. If you think about the image of a woman giving birth, it's kind of it's troublesome, like crying out and things like this. And again, it may be guided by the type of imagery that you see in Egypt, and so either Jochebed, the wife of Moses, may be being pictured, or maybe it's Israel as a whole in Egypt, but they're crying out. The woman's got 12 stars associated with 12 stars, like 12 tribes, and we see this star type of imagery associated with tribal fathers in Genesis. So you've got this woman, and she's associated with 12 stars, and she gives birth to a child, and then you've got this imagery of this dragon going to devour the child. Well, if you think about the imagery of Moses, he was placed into the Nile. Well, and the basic idea was that he was meant to die, at least according to the plan of Pharaoh. But the Most High had different ideas. And so the basic imagery would be the other children were placed into the Nile but then swallowed up. But then Moses was placed into the Nile, but he wasn't swallowed up. And you've got this kind of devouring type of imagery in Revelation chapter 12. And so it may be mimicking what you're seeing with Moses. He's placed into the Nile, and the Nile's acting as the seven-headed dragon. And he then gets caught up. Well, who picks him up? Well, it's Pharaoh's daughter. And so again, he's lifted up, is exalted up. And if you think about his position now, obviously he's being picked up by the daughter of Pharaoh. And so that implies that he's going to have some kind of rulership. And so again, you've got this kind of rulership narrative in Revelation chapter 12. And so but when it comes to the dragon chasing the woman, again, you may have Exodus imagery behind that as well, right? Because Israel come out of Egypt and they flee into the wilderness, just as the woman flees into the wilderness, a place is prepared for her, and they in the time of the Exodus, they are taken care of by the Most High in the wilderness. The Pharaoh the dragon sends out water from his mouth to swallow up the woman. But what happens in Revelation is the earth opens up her mouth and it swallows the river. Well, if you take that imagery and apply it to the crossing of the Red Sea, what happens to Pharaoh's army? It gets swallowed up by the earth. And so again, this idea of the earth swallowing up may be again a hint towards the Exodus story. So basically, Exodus chapter 12 is a retelling of the Exodus story, and it's using different imagery to get the point across. But again, that's one way to read that text.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you. Any other comments, questions, anything else? Moving into actually, did we finish up Exodus? No, I don't think so. Okay, I'm gonna finish up reading this one then. Moses led Israel from the Red Sea. They all went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah because they were bitter. For that reason, it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" And then they cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the water, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute and regulation, and there he tested them. And he said, "If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and listen to his commandments, and keep all of his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." Which I think that also ties in nicely to Ezekiel, but we're going to make a pit stop in Numbers. Any other questions, comments, insults before we go into Numbers? That was a very short portion. Okay. Numbers 28. I believe it's 28, 19 through 25. But you shall present an offering by fire, a burnt offering to the Lord, 2 bulls and 1 ram, and 7 male lambs 1 year old, that you have without defect. For For their grain offering you shall offer fine flour mixed with oil, 3/10 of an ephah for a bull, and 2/10 for a ram. A tenth of an ephah you shall offer for each of the 7 lambs, and 1 male goat as a sin offering to make atonement for you. You shall present these beside the burnt offerings of the morning, which is for a continual burnt offering. In this way you shall present daily for 7 days the food of the offering by fire of a soothing aroma to the Lord. It shall be presented with its drink offering in addition to the continual burnt offering. On the 7th day you shall have a holy assembly. You shall do no laborious work. All right. Comments, questions, insults?
I missed one parallel. That's my comment. So in Revelation chapter 12, you've got the imagery of the woman being granted wings of eagles, and she flies into the wilderness. And when you look at the Exodus imagery in Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, it says this: "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." And so in Revelation, it says this: when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, that she might fly into the wilderness to a place, so that she might be nourished times and a half a time from the face of the serpent. So again, it's employing this Exodus imagery of fleeing out into the wilderness and being associated with wings. So at different points in Revelation chapter 12, you've got contact with the Exodus story.
Yeah. And I don't have any notes on numbers. So we'll go into Ezekiel. All right, and I know that you guys have lots to say on Ezekiel because it's been popping in main chat like all morning. Okay, Ezekiel 37. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the middle of the valley, and it was full of bones. He had me pass among them all around, and behold, there were many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, Lord God, you yourself know. Again he said to me, Prophesy over these bones, and say to them, You dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord God says to these bones. Behold, I am going to make breath enter you so that you come to life, and I will attach tendons to you, make flesh grow back on you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you so that you may come to life, and you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and I prophesied. There was a loud noise, and behold, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and behold, tendons were on them, and the flesh grew, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, The Lord God says this, Come from the 4 winds, breath, and breathe on these slain, so that they come to life. So I prophesied, and he commanded me, and the breath entered them, and they came to life and stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army. And then, going to the explanation of it, he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the entire house of Israel. Behold, they say our bones are dried up, and our hope has perished. We are completely cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them again, This is what the Lord God says. Behold, I am going to open up your graves, and cause you to come up out of your graves, my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord, when I have opened up your graves and caused you to come up out of your graves, my people, and I will put my spirit within you, and you will all come to life, and I will place you on your own land, and then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and done it, declares the Lord. Okay, opens for comments, questions, insults, observations.
Okay, so we've seen how there's parallels between the life of Moses and the life of the nation, but this type of principle happens with other figures as well. And so Ezekiel is going to be operating on a similar principle where he prefigures what happens later on with the nation. And so if you track back to Ezekiel chapter 2, so Ezekiel was on the floor, and the Most High reveals himself to him. And then Ezekiel is picked up by the Spirit, and he's placed on his feet. Well, this imagery of being picked up and being placed on his feet via the Spirit is then going to be replicated in what we've just read when it comes to the Valley of the Dry Bones prophecy. So just like Ezekiel, they're on the floor. Just like Ezekiel, the breath of life or the Spirit comes upon them, and it causes them to stand on their feet. And so basically, again, we've got this link from the prophecy specifically back to Ezekiel. And when we think about this type of imagery, could there be another connector here? Could there be Adamic imagery behind the surface? So if we think about the creation of Adam for a moment, I think it's reasonable to say that when the Most High formed him from the dust, he would have been on the floor. He wouldn't have been standing. And then you've got the breath of life being breathed into him. And then at that point, he would stand on his feet. And so if you accept that kind of assumption I've just made there, and then apply it to the Ezekiel and the Valley of the Dry Bones imagery, you've got this kind of now Adamic kind of imagery behind what Ezekiel's doing and what the Valley of the Dry Bones is doing. So it's fusing together ideas of creation to the actual prophecy. And when you look at the Second Temple period material, you'll have fragments from the Dead Sea Scroll, and they're retelling Ezekiel. And what they do, they employ a phrase, and it was so, from the Genesis account into the account of Ezekiel chapter 37. The main idea is that when they're thinking in terms of the resurrection that they see of Ezekiel 37, they're associating it with creation. And so there's some kind of link there that links it all together. And so basically this places the nation in Adamic kind of imagery. And within the book of Ezekiel, this would make a lot of sense. In the previous chapter, Ezekiel 36, the promised land is considered to be like Eden. And then what the Most High is going to do is going to take his people who are outside the land and then place them in Eden, or in the new land, which he calls Eden. And so this is really mimicking what you see with Adam, because Adam was formed outside of the garden. He was then placed into the garden. So again, they're mimicking the action of Adam there. And so when you read the Hebrew as well in Ezekiel 36, in English, it's going to use this phrase, flock of men. But in the Hebrew, it uses flock of Adam. And so if you combine all of the imagery together, you get him placing his new Adam, his flock of Adam, into Eden, just like you've got in the Genesis account. And then if you add that to the imagery that you see with the resurrection scene in Ezekiel 37, you've got the Spirit coming upon them, just like how Adam had the breath of life breathed into him, and then they stand on their feet. So basically, Adamic imagery now is powering what Ezekiel is saying through these connecting points. And so again, this really all links back to Ezekiel and how Ezekiel is being presented in a kind of an Adamic form. And this makes sense. If he looks up and sees the vision, he sees one like the Son of Man. And then and at that point, he gets called Son of Man. So there seems to be some kind of relationship between him seeing what he sees and then being called Son of Man. And so again, you've got this Adamic imagery just below the surface. But those are my comments.
Cool. I'm just checking the chats, make sure everything is good. Okay.
I've also got some interesting commentary too. This is also from Rashi, in regards to at the beginning of Ezekiel 37, where he says, I will lay sinews upon you and cover you with flesh and form skin over you, and I will put the breath in you, and you shall live again. You shall know that I am the Lord. Um, and I will lay the sinews upon you. Uh, but in the book of Job, in chapter 10, verse 11, it says, You clothe me with skin and flesh first, and afterwards, and you cover me with bone and sinew. But to what were these similar? And to a man who undresses and then dresses himself again, in which case, what he took off last, he puts on first. Whereas at the beginning of creation of the fetus, this is going back to kind of envisioning the whole as like a womb birthing a child. Skin and flesh come first, and afterwards, bone and sinew.
Mm.
Just thought that was an interesting take on.
Interesting. So it's connecting the idea of resurrection to birth.
Yes,
That's
because
interesting.
they're going to be resurrected a second time, and um, if we go back and look at that particular chapter of Job and how they word it specifically there, it's sort of comparing their resurrection to the birth of a child.
Yeah, I mean, you got like other rabbinic material, like in the Targum of Psalms, not Targum of Psalms, sorry, Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, and it talks about how Israel is Zion is considered to be a mother, and at the resurrection, she's going to have her children. So the inference from that is that the resurrection acts like a birth, where she gets her children back. So that's nice imagery that you got there.
Yeah, I've got a couple related verses here, which are interesting, with and kind of go with Ezekiel. I'll just read them off, but yeah, you can probably see the parallels here. In John 5:28 through 29 says, Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in tombs will hear his voice and come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. Matthew 27:52 says that the tombs broke open, the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. And then also we see that same imagery again, Revelations 11:11. After 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Um, so it's just you have that same imagery repeating, talking about it in the New Testament as well, which seems to definitely be a callback to Ezekiel's prophecy.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you got like intertextual allusions to the valley of the dry bones. They stand on their feet, the breath of life enter into them, and so this can really help you interpret what Revelation is saying. And so you've already got you've also got like Gog and Magog imagery employed within Revelation. So you know that Revelation is already using portions of Ezekiel. So these types of allusions are important to understand, because now you can use Revelation to interpret Ezekiel, and Ezekiel really is responding to ideas of exile. How do we end the exile? How do we bring a resolution to it? And so when it prophesies in the way that it does, utilizing the type of imagery that it does, Adam, Eden, and things like this, it's couching the end of the exile in terms of Genesis 1 to 3. Because Genesis 1 to 3 is really the original intent of mankind, of the Most High to mankind. And so it makes sense that this is how the Most High is going to put things right. This is how he's going to bring an end to the exile and bring a resolution to world history. He's going to end up where we begun in Genesis 1 to 3. And so you got the Eden imagery, you got the Adam imagery, and you got the breath of life imagery, all associated together there. Anyway, end of my comments.
Yeah, and then also you have just another parallel one here, talking about all the tombs will open, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to resurrection of judgment. And then in Revelation 20, that same imagery, but the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged according to what they had done. Kind of pointing still to like this whole, separating of the waters, and where the sea giving up those dead to be judged again, as well as the great deluge, the flood, where the dead and the sea are essentially just giving up everything for the resurrection of judgment. Just cool parallels.
Yeah, the sea is understood to be a place of chaos. You can't really live there. And so in the ancient world, it's seen as just a place of chaos. You can't live there. You can't really do much. If it gets a bit windy or stormy, there's going to be real problems there. And so the absence of the sea is very significant. It's indicating an end to chaos. There won't be that area anymore. And things like this, and that's where the Tanim live, by the way, in the sea. So that could be a little hint as well to that kind of imagery. Because when you think about Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the way that it describes Gog and Magog in their defeat, it sounds very similar to how Pharaoh is going to be judged in Ezekiel 29. And it uses this kind of imagery that in Ezekiel 29, where Pharaoh's a Tanim, but then he's going to be caught and he's going to be dragged, and there's going to be hooks in his jaws. And this hooks in the jaws language is employed with Gog and Magog. So it could be, I think that it's actually presenting Gog and Magog in the context of Tanim imagery, this sea monster type of imagery. And so when the Messiah comes back, again, he's defeating the Tanim, because like Gog and Magog is employed in Revelation 19 and 20. And so, there's a lot of chaos monster imagery there that we've really got to think through. But anyway, those are my comments.
Okay, last section is the Revelation 15. I think it's just 1 through 4. It's a short one. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last, because in them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw something like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who were victorious over the beast and his image and the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, holding harps of God. And they sang the song of Moses, the bondservant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God the Almighty. Righteous and true are your ways, King of the nations. Who will not fear you, Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. For all the nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. And that is the end of Revelation 15 portion. And also I'm going to open up comments, questions, insults for pretty much this entire thing from the beginning, anything that you missed previously, as well as this section here specifically.
I have something to say about the prophecy about the dry bones. Is it wrong? I mean, I've always interpreted that as, and forgive me if this is off base or anything, Israel coming from a purely Jewish perspective to the messianic perspective of Jesus. Is that incorrect? In the end times, as he calls his people to his, am I like totally off base on that?
I'm not sure. I guess what do you mean by that?
I mean, the Jews don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. I mean, the messianic perspective is that he is the Son of God.
Sorry, I missed some of that because of the background noise. What was that?
It's my understanding that the pure Jewish perspective is that they don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. But and he hadn't even come yet. They're still waiting to come the first time.
Mhm.
But the messianic perspective of Jesus is that he did come and he died and rose again, and he's going to come back the second time and rule forever. And that's not and that valley of the dry bones represents that calling of the Jews back in the end time. Before,
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
does that make sense at all? I just
Yeah. Um.
Is
Yeah.
that viable interpretation? I know Scripture can be interpreted in many, I mean, many right ways. I mean, it can have double meaning. Something meaning a meaning like the prophecy can have something that meant something a long time ago and something in the future as well.
Yeah, and I think that there is something there. There's a lot of parallel verses in the New Testament that talk about kind of this return, um, this return back from being dead, or Israel saying that they are essentially their bones are dry and they're needing something, and then having this life breathed into them and returning back to God in the way that He wants. So yeah, I definitely think that that's, I guess, applicable from my view, but obviously it is interpretation. Um, so
Sure. Okay. Now, can I say that? I mean, is it okay for as far as the grafting in concept? Uh, what's the interpretation of that? A non-Jew being grafted into that covenant.
like the idea behind grafting,
Yes.
just that you are part of the elect in a way. So you are part of God's people.
So the true vine is Israel, and as far as I know, I have absolutely no ethnicity related to Jewish people. So I would be a Gentile, and I could say that I am
You,
grafted into the one true vine, which is Israel. So that's correct to say
yeah,
that.
there's a few verses as well that talk about like salvation comes from the Jews and the root supports you, like as someone who is grafted in to God's people, you're basically supported by the root or the Jews. Um, and so yeah, just being grafted doesn't necessarily mean that you are Jewish. You
Right.
don't like,
Right.
yeah, you don't do that, but
Inward.
you are, yeah,
Inward.
you're inwardly, your faith is of such. Yeah, that's my take on it. I don't know if Naz has a different take or if Dean.
So, when it comes to interpretation of Ezekiel 37, um, that would depend on your assumptions. That would probably need a much more broader kind of discussion, because I would ask questions like, for you, when you interpret it, do you associate it with any other verse, like in the Gospels or the Epistles or in Revelation, and things like that? So it would need a much more kind of nuanced discussion. So I can get, because here's the problem: if you do not connect it in any way, shape, or form to the Gospels or the Epistles and have an authoritative interpretation, it's very tricky to try and say with any kind of certainty what does this text actually mean, because we've got no like authoritative interpretation essentially. And so our operating assumptions may be a bit different about how we interpret it. Me personally, I see the allusions that in Revelation about like the two witnesses having the breath of life breathed into them and standing on their feet, and this is very elusive to Ezekiel 37. And so that would be a more broader discussion about whether you do or you don't, or how you interpret that. when it comes to being grafted in, so in the Greek there in Romans chapter 11, the Apostle Paul only, when he's talking about the nations being grafted in, he only speaks of them in the singular, not in the plural. And so this isn't many branches replacing many branches. This is like one branch, so to speak, being grafted in among the many branches. And so sometimes people have this kind of view, well, all of those branches got cut off, and we've got all these other branches that have kind of grafted. Well, it doesn't actually work like that. Not in Romans chapter 11. So very, very, very briefly, because I could just go on and on about this. When it comes to how the Apostle Paul understood the strange situation that was happening in the first century, so the Apostle Paul asks a question in Romans chapter 3: is the Most High of one nation, or is he the Most High of all nations? And he argues that the Most High is the Most High of all nations, or many nations instead of one nation. And within Romans, you can see his argument against circumcision, those of the nations, should they be circumcised? And he says no. The function of that is to say that if the nations become Israel, then that only leaves the Most High being the Most High of one nation and not all nations. Because now you've got a change of status with those nations who are coming in, they're getting circumcised, and their status changes into Israel. And so the Apostle Paul says, no, don't do that. Because when you look at Romans chapter 15, in Romans chapter 15, verse 10, he has a citation of Deuteronomy 32, 43. And in Deuteronomy 32, 43, it says something like this: rejoice nations with his people. And so there, the Apostle Paul is pointing to a expectation within the Torah that one day the nations will worship side by side with the nation. And in that kind of context, the Most High then is the Most High of all nations instead of one. And the prophets, when they're looking about this, there's different places in the prophets which indicate this this strange new relationship between Israel and the nations. Like, for instance, in Isaiah 56, it talks about the temple and how the temple is going to be the house of prayer for all peoples. And so it's got this kind of universal approach. And also in Zechariah chapter 14, you see the nations coming up to the Feast of Tabernacles and observing it. So again, you've got instances in the prophets where the nations are observing the festivals of Israel. And so this attests to this strange new relationship where there isn't this enmity between Israel and the nations, but there is this close association together. But ultimately, this tracks back to Deuteronomy 32. When Moses was about to die, he gives this long song. It's 43 verses. And at the very end, there's an expectation that the nations will end up worshipping side by side with Israel. And so the unfolding of the gospel is that the dawn of the Messianic age has now come upon us. And because it's now come upon us, this strange new relationship is here right now. And so Israel should still be Israel, and nations should not become Israel. However, they should both participate in this new relationship. And so when he's talking about grafting in, he means it in that sense of the nations coming close and participating in Israel's festivals and table fellowship and things like this. But there is still a distinction in the sense of Israel is still Israel. The calling of Israel is to be Israel. Like, for instance, I'll step outside of Romans for a moment. In Corinthians, for instance, chapter 7, he gives his rule for all of the assemblies. And his rule basically says that in the calling that you were called, remain. So if you were circumcised, don't become uncircumcised. If you are circumcised, don't become circumcised. If you're not circumcised, don't become circumcised. The function of that is to ensure that each one remains true to their calling. However, at the same time, you've got this new relationship between the two. And so there is an expectation that the nations will begin to worship side by side with the nation and participate in the festivals and things like this. And so when those of the nations do this, when they actually participate in the festivals and they have table fellowship with Israel and things like this, what they're attesting to is that Yeshua is the Messiah and that the Messianic age has dawned. And so it's actually testimony for the Messianic era.
That's not until after Jesus returns, though, right? When that actually happens, when the nations will worship with Israel.
Well, this is how it's difficult, because it's very, very difficult to convey to people how you would think in the Second Temple period. But you've got this already but not yet philosophy, where you basically act out that which is not yet fully there. And you can see this type of principle employed in places like Romans chapter 4, where he calls things that are not as if they were.
Right.
And so when you look at the Gospels, for instance, in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 21, when the Messiah goes into the temple and he casts out the money changers, notice carefully what he says. He cites from Isaiah 56, my father's house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Shall be called, not is called, shall be called. And so this is what he's here to do. He's here to bring about the Messianic age that Isaiah and other prophets are pointing to. And when you look at the Gospel of John, when the Gospel of John also tells the account of him going into the temple, he says, "You shall not make my house a house of merchants." Well, this is very elusive language, because when you look at the expectation that you've got in Ezekiel, when the Messianic age happens, what you'll see is that the traders, the merchants, are no longer in the house, no longer in the temple. So the very action of casting out the money changers and saying, "Do not make my father's house a house of merchants," is bringing to mind Ezekiel chapter 14, Zechariah chapter 14, and the Messianic age. And so basically, these are very prophetic actions that he's doing. And so this is his intention. His intention is to bridge this divide between Israel and the nations, bring them together and make them worship side by side. And so when people accept the claims of the gospel and participate in that Messianic vision, you're testifying that not only Yeshua is the Messiah, but the Messianic age has broken into the age. So that means it's not yet fully manifest, but right now you can participate in it, and it's acting like a signpost to the Messianic age.
Okay. That's that resounds in my life. I think bear with me for a minute. Probably, I would say at least 10 years, we have done not regularly, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody that, but we do a what I call a loose Sabbath, and sometimes we hit it Friday afternoon, sundown, and sometimes we don't, and we do it Saturday morning. And throughout the years, there have been years that we followed the feasts all year, and done some kind of version of our own little. Because I mean, we don't have a Messianic church. We don't have a local Messianic church, unfortunately. So we do what we can, and it's actually I don't know if y'all heard of Larry Hutch, the Torah blessing. We basically that's kind of the format of what we use for our Sabbath, and it's been probably the most, other than salvation, the most important thing that it's been life changing for us. It's really there's nothing magical about it, but it's just we have that time set aside for the Lord. But anyway, that's just I'm rambling now. I'll hush.
So I was just talking to
Yeah,
myself
I mean,
on this for a second.
I mean, this is about the messianic vision. What was the vision that the Messiah had? What is he trying to respond to? And I think that for that we have to look to his very actions, and I look to very concrete actions. So he goes into the temple and he cites these places. So he's giving us prophecies that we have to go and look at, and we have to go and understand. What did the prophets actually see in the Messianic age? What did it look like? And so when those of the nations participate because they're invited, it's not so much they're commanded, it's they're invited to participate in the festivals. They're invited to participate in worshipping side by side with the nation. And when that happens, that is testimony and proof that Yeshua is the Messiah, because now you're testifying that, yes, the Messianic age has dawned. And I, as a person from the nations, if you're a person from the nations, am testifying to that through my very actions. And so now, it brings the vision alive, and you're actually demonstrating that this is it. That this is part and parcel of the Messianic vision, and in breaking, it's like a dam, like the imagery of a dam breaking, and it's trickling through. The water's trickling through, but it's not yet fully burst. In the Messianic age, you're going to have a full manifestation of these things. Different prophets are talking about how the nations are going to be worshipping, like, for instance, in the Feast of Tabernacles in Zechariah chapter 14. We've got the place in Isaiah chapter 56 where it's looking forward when the nations will come to the house of the Most High. But you've got it in other places as well. And so you really have to look at what the prophets are saying and say, are the prophets indicating that Torah is still going to be valid? And if the answer is yes, then how does the gospel fit into that narrative? And so it's really important when the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 15 cites from Deuteronomy 32:43, where he says, "Rejoice, nations, with his people." It's an invitation to bring about the Messianic age.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, observations, or just whatever else before we close this, and then we'll move on to doing some community game stuff, if anyone wants to.
I'm having some surprise guests over today, so I'm gonna hop out a little bit early.
Okay.
But it was nice talking to you guys today, and just ping me if you want to send me any questions, comments, or insults.
Sounds good.
Take care, Buzz.
All right. Well, that
You as well.
concludes the portion study today. So feel free to stick around if you want to keep asking questions, do some fellowshipping, play a game or two. Might start up some Jackbox. And for everyone else, we'll catch you next week. If you're on Twitch, just type Discord in the chat. You'll get a link to our Discord channel, and you can join the voice conversation and the ongoing discussions throughout the week. And also for those that are in Discord, all of you people, if you go to the announcements channel, there is a Parsha survey. So if you want to fill that out and let us know what you liked, what you hated, it's completely anonymous. So you can just make fun of Naz or me or Yellow for not showing up again. Yeah, and we'll keep making these better each week. And Naz, are you going to sing the outro music this time?
No.
Okay, well, it was worth a shot. All right. All right, I'm gonna turn off the stream, and then I think we'll start up some Jackbox if anyone wants to play, and then do a game of that and hang out, have some fun.